He stood up during testimony service, in front of the entire congregation, 400 people who had watched them raise 3 children in that same church for over 20 years, and he called his wife a burden. He said the word out loud, into a microphone, in front of God and everyone they'd ever known. He said she'd held him back, that she'd never truly supported his calling, that the church deserved to know the truth about the woman standing beside him every single Sunday. Gloria didn't cry. She didn't argue. She reached up, unclipped the small gold cross pin from her blouse, the one her mother had given her 30 years earlier, set it gently on the pew beside her, and walked out of that sanctuary without saying a single word. Before we continue, if you believe a woman's dignity is worth more than any man's approval, even inside the walls of a church, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs strength today, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the holiest thing a woman can do is finally walk away from a place that stopped protecting her. Gloria and Deacon Marshall had been married for 23 years. They met at a gospel revival in Charlotte when Gloria was 26, working as a schoolteacher, and Marshall was a young, magnetic associate minister everyone in the congregation already whispered would one day lead his own church. Gloria fell for his conviction, his certainty, the way he seemed to speak directly to something true whenever he stood behind a pulpit. They married within a year, and for the first decade, their life together looked, to everyone watching, like exactly what a marriage inside their community was supposed to look like. Marshall built his own congregation from the ground up, starting with barely 30 members meeting in a rented storefront, and Gloria stood beside him through every single step of it. She played piano for the early services because they couldn't afford a proper musician. She organized the Sunday school when there was no budget for staff. She hosted board meetings in their small apartment kitchen, cooking for deacons and their wives long into the night, while Marshall built relationships that would eventually grow his church to over 400 members. She gave up her own teaching career entirely in their 8th year of marriage, at Marshall's request, to focus on raising their 3 children and supporting the ministry full-time. She told herself, the way many women in her position told themselves, that her sacrifice was itself a calling, a quiet but essential partnership in something larger than either of them individually. For years, that belief held steady. Marshall thanked her publicly from the pulpit on their anniversary. He credited her, often, as the reason the church had grown as quickly as it had. Gloria believed completely that their partnership was exactly what it appeared to be from the outside. But over the past 3 years, something in Marshall had begun shifting, subtly at first, in ways Gloria noticed without fully nomming. The church had grown large enough to attract regional attention, invitations to speak at larger conferences, a small but growing following on social media where clips of his sermons circulated widely. Marshall began spending more time crafting his public image, more time with younger staff members who managed the church's growing digital presence, less time actually present in the marriage that had built the foundation he now stood on. He started making small comments during sermons, references to sacrifice, to partners who didn't fully understand a man's calling, comments Gloria absorbed quietly, telling herself they were general, not personal sermon material rather than something aimed specifically at her. The comments grew sharper over months. During a marriage counseling series he taught to the congregation, he described, without using her name directly, a wife who had grown, in his words, comfortable rather than supportive, a woman who no longer understood the weight of what he carried. Gloria sat in the 3rd pew during that sermon, her face carefully composed, while several members of the congregation glanced toward her, understanding exactly who he was describing even without a name attached. She never confronted him about it directly. She told herself, the way she'd told herself for over 2 decades, that Marshall's public words were simply part of his ministry style, that private conversations at home remained separate from whatever persona he performed from the pulpit. She continued showing up every single Sunday, playing piano when needed, organizing events, standing beside him at every church function with the same steady composure she'd maintained for 23 years. The Sunday it finally happened was, ironically, a testimony service, a special evening service where members of the congregation were invited to share how God had moved in their lives over the past year. Marshall had asked Gloria beforehand if she'd be willing to share a brief testimony about their marriage, framing it as a celebration of their partnership for the congregation's upcoming anniversary series. Gloria agreed, genuinely looking forward to speaking publicly, for once, about the life they'd built together. She never got the chance. Marshall took the microphone first, ostensibly to introduce her, and instead launched into an extended, increasingly personal monologue about the sacrifices he had made building the church, the loneliness of leadership, the burden of carrying a congregation's spiritual needs, while, in his exact words, going home to a wife who had stopped truly seeing him years ago. He described feeling unsupported, misunderstood, spiritually isolated within his own marriage. And then, looking directly at Gloria, sitting in the front pew in the dress she'd worn specifically for this celebration, he said the word that silenced the entire sanctuary. Burdens. He said she had become a burden he carried quietly for years, that the congregation deserved to understand the true cost of his ministry, that even now, standing beside her, he often felt entirely alone. The sanctuary fell into a silence so complete that Gloria could hear the air conditioning cycling somewhere above the pulpit. 400 faces turned toward her, waiting, the way people always wait for a humiliated woman to break down publicly, to confirm the story just told about her. If you've ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect you, in a place that was supposed to be safe, tell us in the comments, because what Gloria did next changed the entire trajectory of Marshall's ministry in ways he never saw coming. Gloria sat perfectly still for a long moment, long enough that the silence itself became its own kind of statement. Then, slowly, she reached up and unclipped the small gold cross pin from her blouse, the one her mother had given her the week before she married Marshall, a piece of jewelry the entire congregation had watched her wear every single Sunday for over 2 decades. She set it gently on the pew beside her. She stood up, she smoothed her dress, and she walked down the center aisle of that sanctuary, past 400 stunned faces, past her own 3 children sitting in the second row, past deacons and elders who had known her for over 20 years, and she walked straight out the front doors of the church without once looking back toward the pulpit. Marshall called after her once, her name echoing through the microphone, but Gloria did not turn around. She got into her car, drove to her sister's house 2 towns over, and did not answer a single phone call that night. The video of that testimony service, recorded automatically for the church's online archive the way every service was, spread faster than anyone in the congregation expected. Within a week, clips of Marshall's speech, and of Gloria's silent, dignified exit, had circulated far beyond their own church community, shared and reshared with captions expressing outrage on Gloria's behalf, admiration for the composure she'd maintained walking away from a humiliation most people agreed no woman should have had to endure in a place of worship. Marshall's congregation, over the following months, did not respond the way he expected. Longtime members, many of whom had watched Gloria build that church alongside him from its earliest days, began quietly stepping back from leadership roles. The Board of Deacons called an emergency meeting. One Marshall was asked to attend without Gloria present, where several longtime members raised concerns about a pattern of public comments they'd noticed building for months. Comments they admitted, in hindsight, they should have addressed sooner. Attendance began declining slowly but steadily. Several key donors, families who had supported the church financially for over a decade, quietly redirected their giving elsewhere. The digital following Marshall had worked so hard to build turned, within weeks, into a source of public scrutiny rather than admiration. Comment sections filled with people who had seen the viral clip and no longer viewed him as the inspiring figure his online presence had once suggested. Gloria, meanwhile, moved into a small apartment near her sister, enrolling in a certification program to return to teaching after nearly 15 years away from the classroom. Her children, all three of them adults by then, made their positions clear immediately, standing firmly beside their mother, one of her sons publicly commenting on the viral video himself, writing simply that his mother had built that church with her own two hands and deserved better than what she'd been given in return. Word moved through the broader religious community as well, the kind of quiet, informal network that exists between churches and denominations. Marshall found himself, within 6 months, uninvited from 2 conferences he'd been scheduled to speak at, his reputation shifting rapidly from rising ministry star to cautionary example. Nearly a year after that Sunday, Gloria, now teaching 3rd grade again and volunteering occasionally at a different church her sister attended, ran into Marshall at their daughter's college graduation, a milestone neither of them was willing to miss regardless of everything that had happened between them. He looked older than his years, thinner, the confidence that had once filled every room he entered noticeably absent. He approached her carefully after the ceremony, his voice quieter than she remembered it being from any pulpit. He told her he was sorry, genuinely, that he'd spent months in his own counseling finally understanding what he'd actually done that Sunday. Understanding that the loneliness he'd complained about publicly had been, in reality, a loneliness he'd created himself by treating her sacrifice as something owed to him rather than something to be honored. Gloria listened, calmly, the same steady composure she'd carried out of that sanctuary a year earlier. "I appreciate you saying that, Marshall," she told him. "But I didn't leave that day because I needed an apology eventually. I left because I finally understood that the church I helped build had become a place where my own dignity didn't matter anymore. I'm proud of the life I've rebuilt since then. I don't need to go back to being someone's burden to know my worth." She congratulated him on being present for their daughter's graduation, and then she walked back toward her family, her own life, rebuilt quietly and deliberately over the past year, fully her own for the first time in over 2 decades. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to know that walking away with dignity is never a weakness, and subscribe for more stories that remind us God does not require anyone to stay in a place that no longer honors them. And before we go, tell us in the comments, would you have walked out the way Gloria did, silently and without a single word, or would you have needed to say something before you could ever leave that sanctuary? Sometimes the strongest testimony a woman can give isn't spoken into a microphone. Sometimes it's simply standing up, setting down what no longer serves you, and walking away without ever once looking back. Gloria lost a marriage that Sunday, but she never once lost her dignity, and in the end, that was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to her in the first place.